So we'll go live 1 minute past. Okay, welcome everybody to this event, Amplifying Black Voices in Creative Media and Marketing. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this event. We welcome guests from media and marketing industries, academics and research students from universities across the UK and worldwide, and staff and students from the University of the Arts. And with students in mind, I'd like to start by honouring this day of commemoration, Stephen Lawrence Day. On the 22nd of April 1993, aged just 18, Stephen was murdered in an unprovoked racist attack in Eltham, South London. He was an ambitious student who wanted to combine his talents in art, design and maths to take a degree in architecture. That racist murder was compounded by police failings and by corruption that has still not been fully investigated. And if you're watching the BBC drama Line of Duty at the moment, you'll know that this case and that of Christopher Alder, who died in police custody, are being worked into the fictional storylines. As many of you will also know, the landmark Macpherson report into the death of Stephen Lawrence, published in 1999, helped to establish the concept of institutional racism. That work is currently being challenged by the government-appointed Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, the so-called Sewell report, and within the governing Conservative Party, who have responded to widespread criticism of the report by turning their guns on the Runnymede Trust and other anti-racist campaigners. Our event today is called Amplifying Black Voices in Creative Media and Marketing. So just note, the Sewell report doesn't mention marketing at all, in fact once, in its 258 pages. The word media, however, does appear 33 times, but only as the media or social media. So can I just take this opportunity to remind the students amongst us that you should never write general statements about all media unless you've established a very strong case for doing so, which the Sewell report most certainly has not. The fact that the Society of Editors have failed to deliver a statement on racism in the British press a month after promising to do so reminds us that media is a plural word, a plural space, and a site of struggle. And we are here today to hear from those trying to identify and advocate for conditions that are fair, non-discriminatory, enabling and supportive of Black and minority ethnic creators, and of the transformations required to achieve that. This event today is hosted by two research groups based in the Media School at London College of Communication, the Creative Industries Management Research Hub and the newly formed Branded Content Research Hub. And it follows a meeting we've had with some of those, including the speakers you're about to hear this afternoon, to discuss action and collaboration. The events we've organised today have been shaped by a number of things. The social activism of Black Lives Matter has brought renewed urgency to calls to deliver racial justice. And of course, we're now witnessing a backlash to that campaigning, illustrated by the Sewell report. Many of you will be very familiar with the criticism. I'd just like to share one line from the response to the report of Education and other trade unions, who say the report demonstrates an astonishing complacency and ignores the fact that any progress made in improving the lives of Black people across the UK has been won by decades of determined campaigning against the odds. The second reason for this event is the growth of self-organisation and networking amongst Black and minority ethnic creatives in media and marketing. And we've focused especially on the work of those involved in marketing communications, advertising, public relations and promotion, and also those working as creatives, especially as individuals in blogging, publishing, social media communication, and as influencers. The final reason for today's event is because we think universities can and should support that networking amongst Black creatives in a whole variety of ways. And we want to do that here at the University Arts London, whether it's helping to host meetings, assist with training courses, or to help showcase and promote the creative work that's produced, or through research or other collaborations. And I'm pleased and proud that we do that within the context of an institutional commitment made by UEL last year in 2020 to work with students, staff, graduates and partners to dismantle systematic racism within our university and the creative industries. And we'll do it finally because we think that supporting the agenda and work of these organisations and networks can be helpful to them, but also bring enormous benefits to our students and staff, including by bringing together and celebrating the work of the speakers at the event today. So I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Nessa Keddo, who will introduce the panel. Nessa.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that introduction. So as Jonathan said, my name is Dr. Nessa Keddo. I'm Senior Lecturer in Communications and Media at London College of Communication, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And we are, as Jonathan said, we're responding to an earlier event which took place where we were discussing some of these crucial issues in media and marketing, and we've got a panel together today to address some of these issues and talk about how we can move such events and progress and projects and work forward collectively. So on our panel, firstly, I would like to introduce Tinuke Bernard. Tinuke, would you kindly be able to spend about 5 minutes introducing who you are, a bit about your organisation, the work you've been involved with developing, and how you started out with your organisation as well?
Thank you very much, Nessa. So my name is Tinuke Bernard. I am a blogger. I've been a member of the blogging community for just under 11 years now. I started off as a mummy blogger, a parenting blogger, and it was a place for me to share my journey as a mum, a rather young mum who didn't have any friends, who also have children. So it was a way of kind of forming a community and being part of a community. As my child grew up and my new child got a bit older and didn't want to be so much involved in my blogs anymore, I decided to change that last year to be more focused on me and being able to then move away from the mummy blogging and be able to write about a wider range of subjects, including social matters, race matters, things like that. So I changed to tinukebernard.com last June. And of course, that's around the same time of the BLM movement and the riots and protests, as well as the George Floyd murder. So around that time, I decided to start the Black Content Creators Directory, which is something I'd actually done for a few years previously, but in a much smaller scale. So normally my list would have been purely bloggers, not content creators. But as times moved on, you know, there are influencers and content creators of all sorts, and I had to move with the times. So I went from a blogging list of about 10 to 20 Black influencers, Black bloggers, to, when I published it, 250 at the start, and now it's about 400 content creators on that list. And the aim was to allow the public to find each other, because I knew it was really hard if I wanted to look on social media to find, you know, you couldn't just search Black fashion blogger or Black hair blogger if I wanted to find products for my hair. And I thought, if I was having this much problems, even though I had a network of other Black creators within my network, how hard must it be for the public to find people that mirror their own image, or to find out about people that don't mirror their own image, if that is the case. So we set up with the public in mind, and also other content creators, because I believe in community, and it's only by knowing that we are out there that we can then collaborate with each other. And as a byproduct from that, loads of PR companies and brands have also used this directory. So I've had lots of emails of people thanking me to say that, you know, they didn't know that all these Black content creators actually existed. And mine is only a small dip in the pond, you know, there are definitely a lot more than 400 out there, you know, hundreds, thousands even. So, but they've used it, and in that way, they're giving people paid work, which is amazing. So I'm glad that people are finding it useful. And hopefully people will then be able to create more, be able to work with more brands and be able to get some equity within, you know, this ecosystem through it. So that's what I do. I hope in future that it will grow, and I have loads of great ideas for it, but that's me in a nutshell.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction. Really great to hear about some of the work that you've done and how it's developed as well. So next up we have Ronke Lawai. Would you like to introduce yourself, Ronke?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Ronke Lawai. I'm the founder of Ariatu Public Relations, which is a PR and communications consultancy based in London. I've been operating in business for well over a decade. My business has always intentionally been very much about positioning Black-owned businesses within the UK across the media. And from very early on, I integrated digital. So as well as traditional media, TV, newspaper, magazines, I've always worked with online blogs and digital spaces. So I was very quick to adapt to social media, but specifically for Black audiences, Black consumers, and the Black businesses that were predominantly my clients. As my business has grown, and it's not just about my business growing, but I've noticed there has been more intentionality from large organizations that want to reach Black, African and Caribbean diasporan audiences. So they utilize Ariatu PR services to engage. Over the past couple of years, I've noticed that a little bit more. It should have always been the case, but I've noticed that a little bit more. It's been an interesting journey because I've always been unashamedly who I am, Black, British, Nigerian. I found that being in an industry like PR, which is like a lot of industries across the UK actually, predominantly white, but also predominantly restrictive. So even if you are a dynamic, creative, talented individual who happens to be Black, it can be restrictive, right? So PR the industry, the sector has been a little bit of an interesting one for me, but I've always stood firm. I've always been very proud of the client base that I've engaged with, and I've always been very, very passionate about engaging not only my clients, but also the audiences about how to utilize the media. So anyone who follows me on social media will see me be very vocal about some of the tactics that the traditional mainstream media uses when communicating to quote unquote diverse audiences. So, you know, I don't suffer fools gladly. I just get on with it and I speak. I'm very vocal about that. And, you know, that could be to my detriment. We'll talk about it through the course of this conversation, because I'm not willing to bow down or accept the crumbs that certain systems want us to accept. It's made things a bit challenging, but honestly, I'm flourishing and I'm really excited about having this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ronke. It's lovely to have you on board as well. I'm sure we've all seen examples of tokenistic diversity by brands in the past 12 months in particular. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Nicole Ocran.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nicole Ocran. I am a fashion blogger primarily. That's how I kind of got my start. I also write. I'm a podcaster as well. I co-host a podcast called Mixed Up around mixed race identity. But I'm obviously here today to talk about the Creator Union, which I'm the co-founder of, which is a union for influencers and content creators in the UK. And this, again, like I'm sure many people will share, this kind of, you know, exploded over last year in June after the murder of George Floyd. And I had found that I was getting inundated with requests to send me product, primarily gifted product, to work for free with brands who kind of needed a Black influencer to show or to highlight that they, again, were being inclusive. And also I even had sort of brands and agencies just in my emails and in my DMs kind of apologizing to me for their lack of for the lack of work that they were doing in this space. And so that was kind of how the union was born. It was born out of not only the need to advocate for content creators and influencers in general, but to uplift Black and Brown influencers, obviously Muslim creators, creators across all of the intersections, and to amplify their voices first. One of the there's an account called the Influencer Pay Gap that obviously highlights a lot of the pay disparity that we've seen across the industry, and so our goal is to basically ensure that brands and agencies and platforms that we're working with are paying creators and also paying them fairly and on time.
Great, no, thank you so much for that, Nicole. And I guess some of those other issues come out there when you're looking at the influencer pay gap and problems with payment and promotions with brands, isn't it? So kind of lots of issues to flesh out there. And so thank you so much for that introduction. Our final speaker, Maya Bogle, is trying to reconnect with us, and hopefully we'll be able to speak to us shortly, and we'll try and involve her in the conversation shortly. But firstly, I'd like to head back over to the panel and ask a series of questions in relation to today's events. And at the end, as Jonathan was saying, we want to kind of come together and come up with an agenda and plan of how we can come together to potentially work together. So, I can see, is Maya back?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, there you are. Hi.
Hi,
Maya.
So sorry, I had a little bit of a Teams issue, but
no.
hopefully you can hear me here on Zoom. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much to Nessa, Jonathan, and the UAL team for inviting me to join this panel. Very honoured and very thrilled to be on it. I'm a co-founder of Talenthouse, and Talenthouse we're coming up for our 12th year, and we launched with a very sort of ambitious goal of trying to democratise the creative industries and the creative process through giving open access through our platforms to creators all over the world. And over the last 12 years, we've now built up a community of, it's coming up for 5 million members in 195 markets or countries around the world. And those members are literally of every colour, every sexuality, every socioeconomic background, every faith and every location. And our mission and our goal is really to inspire them, to give them confidence, to give them courage, to believe in the power of creativity as the most extraordinary gift that they've got, to change the world for a better place, because we really believe that creativity can unite people, inform people, mobilise communities into wider positive action, as well as obviously selling goods and products for the many brands that we work with across the Talenthouse group as well. But honoured to be here today, passionate about creativity and passionate about what we can do to equalise our access to the industries and iron out some of those age-old prejudices which have existed for a very long time.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Maya. Lovely to hear about some of the work, some of the fantastic work that Talenthouse are doing in this field. So, as I said, I'd like to go over to the panel and ask a few questions, if that's okay, and really help to bring together some of the core ideas and progressive notes that we can bring forward working together collectively. So firstly, again, feel free to turn your mics on and speak, or raise your hands, but You've addressed some of the reasons why you've started your organisations or your networks, but we were interested in what are some of the key problems that affect either your organisation, the network, the industry in general, and how have you responded, or how are you trying to respond to some of these issues that you've come across? Whoever would like to go first.
I'm very happy to talk with you. I don't mind. I just think, generally speaking, a lot of people talk about the importance of Black culture, and they talk about how important it is to be representative. But the reality is there still aren't enough voices and still aren't enough members within the Black community who've risen to those really senior roles within our industry. And I think that there are still some age-old issues around access, and that could stem literally from the socioeconomic issues, which can often face very disadvantaged groups of people, not just obviously members of the Black community, but there's lots of poor white men out there too. But it's really about trying to give them access, give them opportunity, and to ensure that it's not seen, in my view, as tokenism or just badging. And I think our industry can be very guilty of tokenism and badging. One of my personal bugbears is Pride Week, when lots of brands decide to slap a rainbow on their logo, and that's meant to kind of tick their LGBTQ plus agenda for the whole year. And I think that's the same for lots of individual days, whether it's Women's Day or Earth Day, which I think it is today. It shouldn't really be about one day, in my view. It should be much more about a seamless integration of culture and values and authenticity and diversity and inclusion across every part of the business, and not just about ticking a box.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I think from my perspective, the problem I found is because a PR is a very, what's what I'm looking, I'm trying to be diplomatic because I'm conscious it's live streamed, but it's very much about who you know. It's there's a lot of nepotism that goes on, and I started my agency and my consultancy based on speaking to my community. Now, I didn't feel like I found community in the PR sector at all, actually. And it's not until the past couple of years that I've been a little bit more plugged into the sector. So I was on the board of the Chartered Institute, and I'm currently on the committee at Women in PR. So I'm more plugged in. But for years, I was focused on my community and the messages that I was feeding into my community and my clients. But the problem that I found beyond the PR sector was when I undertake, for example, a media relations campaign, right? So if I'm working to engage with the press, if we know that the majority, 90, I think it's 93 or 95% of UK media is pretty much white. The media outlets are pretty much white, full of white employees, right? So if I'm trying to tell stories on behalf of a client, there was often a real challenge, especially clients who absolutely deserve to get their stories told. I have many for many years who should have had their stories told across mainstream, and it's not about entitlement. It's just a good business story. It's a good story. But unless what I found and what I noticed is unless it fit a certain narrative that those news outlets and media rooms that happen to be predominantly white understood. So I'm not going to feed into the stereotypes right now, but understood for themselves, they wouldn't get featured. So what I would do to overcome that is, appreciate the blogs, the diasporan press. There's a small network of diasporan media outlets. They're very small, but they're there. The bloggers like Tinuke, engage with those kind of blogging networks and encourage my clients to understand social media, because that owned narrative, that using social media to create content was actually and has become, as we can see, very powerful, and not relying on traditional mainstream media. That was one of the ways that I initially overcame that problem.
Yeah, no, really interesting in terms of your own experiences there. And Nicole, you were about to intervene there with something. Were you going to say something similar or add your experiences?
Yeah, I think when I first started blogging several years ago, my issues were always, again, around education, around access to information. There was a lot of things that I just didn't know, and I think because, you know, what I was doing was primarily fashion blogging, for example, and like Ronke is saying, you know, that it's all about who you know. And I didn't even realize within starting, you know, thinking, oh, I'm just sharing my personal style, I'm just sharing my outfits, that a lot of, again, you know, living in London, a lot of the London fashion influencers, when you think of a traditional London fashion influencer, those girls, those women actually also worked in fashion PR, or they knew someone who worked in fashion PR, and they had a lot of inroads, they had access to clothes on a regular basis, all of these things. And again, these are not things that if you aren't in that space, you're not going to know about it. You just assume that you can't keep up. And so again, which is why I was so keen on starting the union, was not only to provide educational resources to talk about things that, again, a lot of us won't know about if we're in the space, like copyright and who owns the copyrights to your images, for example, but also to really drill down into a lot of the reality, again, of influencing and what it looks like and how it looks on social media, and to say that there are things that you just aren't seeing, and things that you think, a lot of things that you think are just you not being able to are true about you not being able to access certain contacts, certain products, etc., etc. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah,
I think that access point is so valid, and it's, you know, access to mentors, it's access to money, it's access to IT, it's access to having, you know, the right to access to education, which a lot of people just don't, and having to think about spending the money that's now involved in taking on board degrees is a huge deterrent to a lot of people. And, you know, it shouldn't be, but I think having those mentors and other people around you and support networks is so important, to know that you're not alone, and actually you can talk to other people and get some guidance and support, because they might have done it before. And I think mentorships is really, really important. It's something I try to do a lot of. So whenever somebody reaches out to me on LinkedIn and asks me for some advice and help, I'd always encourage anyone coming into the industry, do that. It's amazing how much help people will give you when you ask for it.
I'd just like to add that one of the barriers that I found was that, especially after, you know, there was this huge influx of new followers and brands and PRs and everyone kind of reaching out and getting in touch after, you know, June, July kind of times, but they did it purely for seeing influencers for their blackness and not for what it is they actually did. It didn't matter if they were a fashion blogger or a money blogger or family blogger, they were just black. And then trying to educate that there's more to us than the, you know, the colour. So you didn't actually, after the wokeness and the black squares disappeared, those followers then dropped off, you know, nearly as quick as they had all came flocking, because, you know, they're like, oh, I'm over that now. And it's just actually go, well, actually, whether you're a brand or you're a member of the public who's following these people, you can relate to them. And it's trying to actually sometimes actually convince brands and convince members of the public that, you know, the colour of your skin doesn't make you less relatable. If you're a parent blogger, you're sharing the same parent problems. Your child, regardless of colour, isn't going to sleep through the night. Isn't, you know, you're going to have the same issues regardless. So you are just as relatable and being seen for what it is that we specialise in, you know, whatever our niche is, being seen for that niche, as opposed to just seen as, oh, you know, the amount of times I've had brands, you know, in conversation say, well, we just can't, or sorry, the PRs when they're talking, you know, as the middleman for brands, and we can't, you know, we'd love to have more black people, or we'd love to have more brown people on these campaigns, but our brands just don't see us as how you're going to be relatable to their audience. Why would we be less relatable because of the colour? If we're still sharing the same, you know, we're still going to showcase the products, we're still going to use them. We have money too. So even if you're only going to get the black and brown people, that should be worthy anyway. But everyone should be, you know, just as interested in the content we create, not just because of the colour of our skin. So it shouldn't be an issue, but it is, unfortunately.
Completely agree. Especially, again, when you talk about fashion and in the fashion blogging space, the idea is that you can't afford to wear clothes for some reason, even though we all do. We all buy clothes and we all wear them. But it is that idea that it is that idea that there is that you can only relate to white faces, or to white women in particular wearing certain items, and I always find that funny, because I also worked in influencer marketing before going freelance, and that was usually the feedback from agencies, was that they just weren't convinced that Black people could had spending power, could buy, you know, certain things, and you can point to so many examples of where that isn't the case. Like, I love talking about Melissa's wardrobe, because she is the typical example of how luxury, how Black women love luxury and will spend money just at the drop of a hat because Melissa has shared it. And it really is that simple. And I really, really hope that if there are brands and agencies in the room, that they take note of that.
Yeah, no, definitely, completely agree. And there's kind of, it's kind of one of those things where when an event happens, or we call them kind of life or political social events, such as the past year, kind of brands jump onto it and then die down. Then when something big happens again in 5 years, it will be something that explodes again. So really interesting to hear those contributions there. So then in terms of your own networks and your own organisations, what would you say is the significance of all of this growth that is happening across the industry amongst different networks, against different self-organisations of Black and ethnic minority creators, including your own networks, of course? And how would you like to see all of these networks, organisations, community projects develop? And what type of resources do you think are needed?
Shall I go?
Yeah.
I think that clearly the murder of George Floyd last year was a huge catalyst in really mobilising a world sort of, you know, focused and thinking about Black Lives Matter. And it shouldn't have taken that particular murder for that to happen, but it seemed to be a huge trigger for many sort of movements to start up. I think the pandemic on the heels of that, the US election, the world was just going through quite a big momentous change. So I think that enforced sort of isolation at home, and enforced recognition that people had to almost turn themselves into like little mini gigs, little mini entrepreneurs, and that actually you're sitting thinking, who can I talk to? Who can I network with? Who can I get some support and help with? You know, lots of people were furloughed, some people lost their jobs, some people lost their loved ones. There was huge amounts going on, and that sort of focus on brands requiring more than ever to tick that diversity and inclusion box. I hate the ticking bit. I'd love it if it felt more authentic and was something which, as we talked about earlier, sort of integrated seamlessly into every part of their communication, every part of their employment strategy, every part of their comms altogether. So I think for me, it was those particular triggers that sort of maybe got people thinking about communities. You know, they should be around, you know, for much longer, but I think they're growing and they're going to get stronger, and it's about time. It really is.
Yeah, and I hope, you know, I'm a bit of a cynic because I feel like from my entire life being born in the UK, being born in London, seeing the climate and atmosphere of this country and the way it's treated, mistreated, disrespected Black communities across the country, I feel like, yes, you know, lockdown definitely helped to, you know, force people to pay attention. The video documentation, the actual, you know, well, I didn't watch the video, but some people, you know, watched the video, 9 minutes of a murder, right? Which was very triggering and very upsetting to Black communities across the world, not only in America. I mean, as we speak today, it's the anniversary, may you rest in peace, of Stephen Lawrence. And I feel like historically, there have been many, many moments for organizations, systems, institutions to change, right? I feel like whilst this has been a reckoning, and I really hope it's sustainable, I really hope organizations do more than just, you know, scramble, because for me, it's made me feel a little bit uncomfortable because it does feel like a scramble to cover up. So it feels like they're putting a plaster on an open wound. And I feel like until they actually undertake the surgery and the very painful healing that's necessary, the deep dive, digging into that wound of institutional, structural, systematic racism in this country, the lessons won't be learned, right? Because we still hear from creatives, professionals, Black business owners who are still being undermined. I mean, we spoke, you know, the introduction was brilliant because it included that awful report, which was almost like, oh, here you go, you should be lucky. You should be lucky to be here. Nothing's wrong in the UK. You're fine. When we know that's not the case at all. You know, this past week, there was a debate about Black maternal health, and we're still having to debate our humanity, as you know what I mean? Things like that make me feel very uncomfortable. So whilst I do believe that there is a shift, I hope we can hold on to this energy. I hope organizations do change. I just think that there's still a lot of underlying work to be done, and it's not for anybody within any Black community to do that work. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. So I'm a bit of a cynical person here. Maybe somebody can change my mind through the course of this conversation.
I totally agree with that. And I think before, when I first met Nessa and Jonathan, I think I mentioned this in one of our earlier chats, but it is about the organizations and you know, wider institutions recognizing that they have to lose something, they have something to lose, and being comfortable with that. And my feeling is that they're not. So so again, it's, you know, I agree wholeheartedly with Ronke. It's not our responsibility to have to do that work. And again, so many organizations want to say that they, you know, that they're sorry, or they're excited about their new initiatives, or, you know, all of these big plans, but we have yet to see one that actually works. So sorry about the siren that's going off in the background. We've yet to see, you know, that those things actually come to fruition. But you know, I genuinely do hope. I genuinely do hope so. I hope we see some sort of difference. I think, again, when it comes to the union and what we need in terms of growth and support, is like, it's all about coming together collectively. You know, strength and support in numbers. I think our networks will work really well together, and yeah, I'm hoping, you know, with time, those things, we can be able to see that change.
I think for me, I feel the cynicism in the air, and I am a bit of a cynic, but at the same time, I'm excited from this year, because I think these networks in themselves, we're creating our own equity. You know, for too long, we've had to rely on the likes of, you know, Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you know, and that's where our real estate lay. And I think that by having these networks and having, you know, the strength in numbers, as Nicole said, we're able to kind of create our own spaces and create our own seats at the table. So even if the brands and PRs, if they start, you know, drawing back, which they have, when I started my directory, it got like 20,000 views in that first week, and I was like, "Oops, okay, what's going on here? Like, this is a brand new blog. It has nothing else but this directory on it. Why is there so much traffic?" That has sloped. It slinked straight away, and you know, it's lucky to get 1,000 people looking at that same thing in a week, where it had 20,000 in a day at one stage. So it is drawing back. What I'm seeing is people are still getting jobs from it. People are now making more money because of it. If they're making more money, they can get bigger brands. They can give themselves better lives. We can, you know, create our own seats. We can mentor others. We can pull others up with us. We can create our own tables. It may not be the next Instagram, who knows, but we can create our own spaces and not have to rely so much on, you know, others to let us in. And I think that's what these networks have, you know, shown us. Marianne, who does the Black British Bloggers, she's not on here today, but I live for her resources because I've joined her Patreon. So I pay a little bit of money and I get an awful lot of information back. And that information is power. That, you know, that education is golden to me. So by her having that, you know, having funding now, she's able to create all this resources that help us as creators to grow and create our own pitch and not need, you know, brands and PRs as much as we maybe used to. So the power of the networks, and you know, everyone's networks in this room. I've worked with Ronke on campaigns before. I love her blog and live for her Twitter. You know, it's like all this thing, it's all this, you know, all this information that's coming our way, and it emboldens us and empowers us.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's lots going on in terms of different networks working individually, but as you were just saying, Tinuke, unless things are happening collectively, there's not going to be a big collective voice, is there? Which is really important. Sorry, Maya, were you going to add something there?
I think it's so important that we can try to get this much more inclusivity starting at a much younger level within schools, giving kids access, to give them the courage and the confidence to showcase the careers that are available within the creative industries, to make them think, you know what, I could actually be a game developer, I could create that work, or I could work within the field of augmented reality. And we're trying as a company to really make our platforms as inclusive as possible. We've just launched a youth collaboration platform, which goes as young as 7. So from the age of 7, we're trying to encourage young kids to hone their creative skills, to practice their craft, to tool them up, to give them resources, to give them confidence, to give them courage. And you know, we feel that there is so much creative value out there and so much creative talent, regardless of somebody's, as I said earlier, colour or sexuality or location or socioeconomic background. What we've got to, in my view, try to do collectively is to even out that playing field, to give as much open access as we can. But it is going to your point, Ronke, it's going to take time. There's so much lip service paid to this and a lot of nonsense. And if you look at the boards of most companies and you look at the makeup of most companies' teams and their communities, you know, it isn't as inclusive as it should be. One of the things I love about what we do is when the work comes through to one of our open briefs, people are looking at the work. They're not seeing necessarily immediately the creator behind the work. It's almost like an even democratic process of actually looking at that work, thinking that is incredible. So my God, that person is from a country I've never even heard of. And it's just so humbling and so gratifying and so, I don't know, it's just wonderful. I wake up every day and I'm inspired by our community. And for me, community is everything. And giving, you know, creators the courage and the confidence to create is really important. We've got creators in the Philippines who've bought houses for their family from it because they've earned enough money. We've got gay members of the Russian community that we have where homosexuality is illegal, who've got the courage to create. And I think that, you know, courage and confidence, collaboration and, you know, resources and mentoring is really important too.
No, definitely, Ryan. I definitely agree. And kind of leading on from some of your points there and what you were saying about it starts in schools and those types of resources need to be built on. So what would you say for universities then? So us as UAL, as a university, as a college, London College of Communication, what would all of your key message to us be? And also, what's your view of universities? What have universities done? What have they done badly? What could we do better to support some of the work that you'd like to do?
Personally, I'd love to see more bursaries. I'd love to see more scholarships. I'd love to see more ways for community members who aren't living in sort of, you know, we've got lovely mummies and daddies living in very nice, you know, London houses who could very easily go for the internships or go for the university places where they've got free accommodation or they've got parents that can fund their university tuition fees. So I think it'd be really interesting to explore different ways of co-funding a programme of open inclusive education, allowing people to think, do you know what, I don't want to leave university with a big debt and no guarantee of a job. And that's a reality for lots of people doing the humanities degrees, thinking, well, what guarantee have I got that I'll get work? So looking at how we can work with more institutions, more companies, more brands to either fund that education process, to almost create apprenticeships throughout that process, to tool your students up, to give them active access and practice to hone their crafts and skills and demonstrate that they're going to get that job as soon as they've graduated. So more bursaries, perhaps more digital access. So for those students that literally financially cannot afford and haven't got a bursary to attend a university, to give them some open access through digital tutelage to actually do that.
Yeah, definitely. No, I definitely agree. And also for the audience, if there's anyone listening who would like to we'd like to invite you for any questions. If there's anyone who wants to ask the panel any questions or have you got any comments, please do put it in the chat and in the Q&A box, sorry, and we'll address them shortly. Is there anyone else on the panel who wanted to say their thoughts? What else could we be doing as universities, or what have we done badly? What do we need to do better?
I'd
It's
like to
been a
say,
while since I graduated. But from my perspective, I'm actually on the Dean's Council at Lancaster University, my university. So it's interesting because they were proactive in including me in that Dean's Council at management school, and it's measures like steps like that in terms of identifying alumni that are members of the alumni that's different from the usual, and being intentional about, you know, it's not. I feel, and hopefully this feeling remains, that it was a genuine step and not just a tick box. Looking at their Dean's Council in the past. So universities have to be intentional about identifying who they include on advisory boards. I feel like they have to allow safe spaces, and I don't want to use that as just a word or a term that's used, just a flippant term. There has to be safe space for feedback, whether it's alumni, whether it's student body, and especially if we're speaking about, you know, Black students, there has to be a safe way of sharing feedback and messaging, and also a safe space for that creative energy to flow and engage. The experience of university should be one that uplifts and guides, not simply just to educate, right? And if we're talking about that academic space where we are trying to build generations of thinkers, leaders, people who are going to be social disruptors, then there has to be a way in which universities allows for those pockets of safe spaces and genuinely guides those and protection is really key. I think some of the feedback I hear from speaking at different events, but when I speak to students, Black students in different universities, not only in London but around the country, there's a lack of protection. So one thing I actually do appreciate from this session, so I will mention, is just that there was a comment about, you know, the questions being asked, right? Even something as intentional about that protection of saying, okay, the kinds of questions that will be fielded to the panel take into consideration our safety, and really does create that atmosphere of not just comfort, but allows us to be, you know, freedom of expression. I think that's what we need more of that within the university landscape. We need more of that within the academic world, I think.
No. Go ahead, Maya, sorry.
So sorry, I was talking to one of my lovely contacts, Helen Basweye, who runs a beautiful sort of creative consultancy and agency earlier. And I said, you know, I'm not a Black woman. I'm tinted. My dad, bless him, was from Mauritius and my mother's from Scotland, so I'm a bit of a hybrid. But I said, you know, I really want to make sure, you know, I'm talking, so I spoke to 2 or 3 of my different, you know, close Black friends who work within our industry. And she was saying that she felt it was so important for universities as well to really help garner that emotional intelligence and awareness from their Black students too, to almost arm them and equip them with identifying what their worth is. So when they do go out into the marketplace, they're not always on the back foot. They're not always trying to almost make an excuse for, gosh, I'm the only Black woman or Black man in the room, but they can actually have got their own ability to create a persuasive argument for their value. So to be able to talk about their value, their contribution, their worth, both financial and from a contribution perspective. And I think this whole idea of, she mentioned to me, equality versus equity. Lots of people talk about, you know, their equal opportunity employment, but actually driving real equity into their employment is so important. So actually, equal equities, if you've got, you know, podium on the stage, but you've got somebody who's 5'2", which is my height, and somebody who's 6 foot, that's not even. So you've got to think about how you can even these things out. And so I thought that emotional intelligence and emotional value was a really good thing which universities could do. And to Ronke's point, who's, you know, working with a lot of alumni, it's so important to go back to those mentors, to go back to your alumni students of colour and say, come back and talk to our students. Arm them, explain to them some of the stuff that you've had to deal with, some of the issues you've had to face, give them some tools, give them some guidance so they don't just go blind into the workspace. So I think that emotional as well as educational is really, really important.
Yeah, I hugely agree there. I think it's important what you were saying there in terms of equipping students, and a lot of it is about lived experience. There's lots that can be done through training and EDI initiatives, anti-racism plans, but without those lived experiences, you're not going to get a genuine feel for what to expect in the industry. So were there any other contributions there about what universities could do before I find a question? I can see we've got a question from the audience, which we can answer afterwards. Tinuke, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say it's about as well championing, even if it's alumni, or actually championing any, you know, black and brown creatives, no matter what their field, and showing from, even if it's a bit of outreach of actually the universities going and going into the sixth forms and secondary schools and actually championing creative degrees in the first place. And I think it's really important because traditionally, you know, it's a lot more acceptable. I would have loved to have done a creative degree. I always wanted to be a creative. I wrote from, you know, the whole way through school, but it was very much, no, you know, you need to be a doctor, lawyer, you know, at least do a business studies degree if you don't want to do any of those, but you need to, you know, do something professional. And, you know, to kind of educate both the students and the students' families that it's perfectly okay, and to kind of lose that fear that if you do a creative degree, you won't, you know, you won't be able to get a job, you won't get anything from it. That, you know, there are creatives out there that can show that, look, this person has become successful in their field. And, you know, we need to champion that so that people can see that and be less fearful and actually take those degrees on and do those masters and do those PhDs in the first place. Whereas we're kind of scared to do it because we want to support our families. And for some, it might be the first generation who's going to university. So there's a lot of pressure on us to, you know, perform and outperform and, you know, do it in a way that's maybe recognizable by, you know, to our families and to the larger community around us. So there's maybe not as much real estate and respect given to creative industries and, you know, those creative degrees. So kind of championing them and championing those who've come before us and have, you know, succeeded in it, and telling those, as much as it is warning people of, you know, the pitfalls and the hurdles, it's also sharing those success stories as well.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting that you say that. I think there's also been kind of a lot of backlash from the media in the past few years about kind of Mickey Mouse degrees if you're doing a creative degree. So that's one of the reasons why we do need to kind of champion the importance of kind of universities, education, and also it's kind of thinking back to, if you are from an underrepresented background, you don't always have those networks to automatically go out and get an internship. So you do need that university support in lots of instances and cases. So yeah, no, really interesting discussion there, and it's lovely to hear your insights from all of your experience. I think you've all got experience in different fields, but somehow come together collectively to have similar experiences in the past 12 months in particular, following the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd events that's happened. So final question to the panel then, in relation to, if you were to have an ideal agenda for change, what would be the top 1 or 2 points that you would give us in terms of what needs to be changed in the industry, what needs to be changed amongst academics? If you had a wish list, let's say, what would the 2 things be? Difficult question.
I mean, gosh, there's so much we probably would love to see change. I mean, I've always believed in the power of creativity, and I think it's one of probably our greatest exports that this country is now going to have. You know, we're not manufacturing a lot of cars anymore, or, you know, not quite sure how our other resources and what we've done to poor Mother Earth, how well they're doing. But creativity is incredible. It's a renewable resource. And if one of my wishes would be for people to recognise the absolute importance of creativity as a subject, and the power of creativity to change, to inform, to unite, to mobilise, to heal, and to get people thinking about people in different ways. And one of the greatest projects we've worked on is with the United Nations. I know some people have got, you know, different points of view about what the UN do, but they've been an incredible partner of ours, and we've worked with them across several different initiatives, from COVID-19 to the vaccine through to International Women's Day and activism for women. And it's amazing seeing the work that comes through from creatives from all over the world. And I think one of the wishes I have is that people recognise that a great idea can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to come from the traditional walls of a creative agency or four white men of the Mad Men days in Madison Avenue or, Shoreditch or Soho. But actually, there are so many incredibly talented people in the world that we should listen to, and we should have an open playing field for people to have their chance to have their voice heard and their work seen.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. I think one of my wishes, and Tinuke mentioned something earlier on in the conversation about, seeing. Okay, so I'm trying to find the right words because I don't want to cause too much trouble.
Go on, do it, Ronke, get in there.
I'm not. But seriously, if you see us, you see beyond. If we're talking about Blackness not being monolithic, right, and really understanding the beauty and true diversity of Black communities in this country, then it should be reflected across all creative types of medium, right? So, for example, it shouldn't take something that's racially driven or a racist incident before we start to see more Black people on screen. It shouldn't take only, a handful of talented creatives at the top of their game doing things in film, music, before we consider to be relatable. I think that's such nonsense. I feel like you have to start to see the vast scope of diverse representation within diasporan communities. That's my one wish. There are so many amazing creative minds across African and Caribbean diasporan communities in this country. The talent is being wasted. We're seeing examples of, so a really quick example of a creative talent that I've seen just this week is a series that I watched on YouTube called Dreaming Whilst Black. It's been given a pilot on the BBC. A pilot is literally it's like the creatives have to prove themselves before they're given a series. And for me, that's just so frustrating because there's so many series on the BBC, my own opinion, that are just nonsense, but they're given an opportunity, right? They're given 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes. We're only seeing one pilot episode and they have to prove themselves before they're given more. And then it's this annoying thing that happens where creative talents across a multitude of industries end up going either back to their countries of origin or to America, where Black talent, creative talent, is given scope. Now, obviously, that's not without issue, but I feel like in this country, there's just so much creative energy, and it just feels so frustrating that we're still having to prove ourselves bit by bit before we're just given a chance, and we're given a chance to show the scope and diversity of ourselves within this country. So for me, I just want the truth of our identity to be allowed, the freedom of expression to be allowed to be given space. We don't need permission, but I just want it to be seen and visible and just, yeah, that freedom of scope. That's what I want. That's my wish. And I'm very passionate about that wish.
Mine would be that there's greater transparency between everyone, and not just Black creators, but creatives full stop. So I met up with a lovely friend of mine, and she has probably 10 times the follower count than I did. And she congratulated me on the campaign I did. And I was laughing about how, that fee was going to help me buy my car or whatever. And she was really confused, like, well, how much did you get paid? And when I told her, she was in shock, because even with her 10 times the followers, she'd never been paid anywhere near as much as I got paid for that. And that was like my new norm. Like, I'm not accepting less than that because it's my time. So it was this thing of going, why didn't you know that? Why didn't you know that that's how much you should accept and you should be going for? And if I can get that, you should be getting a lot more than that, because, she's very niche and she has a huge following and she's so talented. And it was just beyond me that she wasn't getting that regularly. I didn't understand how that wasn't a thing. And it's because there's all these silos and all these secrets, and even a lot of the contracts even say you're not allowed to mention how much it is. I would love to tell you how much it was right now, because I'm really proud of it, but I can't, because it's signed in the contract that I can't say how much it is. And it's that thing of, it's causing all these problems that unless you have a network, I don't have many people who create content, so I can't quickly message them and go, hey, have you heard of this person? Is this an okay amount? What it is. I've got to kind of guess each time and use things like the influencer pay gap and look for examples and kind of go, okay, well, they mentioned that kind of fee and they were that kind of size, so maybe that's an okay amount to charge. And it's all guessing and kind of having to guess that you know your worth enough and you know the industry enough. And if we're all guessing, there's this huge disparity between what I may feel comfortable charging and what someone else might feel comfortable charging. And it leads to problems, because how are we then supposed to support ourselves and do this as our full-time, you know, jobs, if that's what we want to do, if we can't charge enough? Or, you know, even within the actual brands and the industries, you know, it's not in their interest to tell us that, oh, actually, you've undercharged yourself. You could have put a 0 at the end of that. Why would they? Because that gives them more budget to then go out to more people. It works in their favour not to. And luckily, I've had a few who have come back to me and go, hey, add a 0. And I'm like, what? Thank you for telling me that. But most wouldn't, you know. So it's having greater transparency. And I don't know what that looks like. I think things like Nicole's Creator Union will allow for that, because it will help set certain, you know, like a minimum wage for, you know, just having some way for people to know that this is the minimum you should accept, and this is the minimum, some kind of sliding scale. I know it's different for industry and size and engagement rate, and it's going to be a really complicated, you know, algorithm that we'll leave Nicole to figure out. But, you know, I think it's one of those things that we need. You should be able to, you know, put in your size and your engagement rate, and it pops a figure out and helps you know that I'm okay charging this, and, you know, to have that confidence to do it. And yeah, we need to get there, because, you know, people need to be paid what they're worth, and it's beyond just money. It's about self-esteem. It's about just respect for, you know, the industry. You wouldn't go into, you know, a normal print paper and say, hey, I'm going to pay you £10 for that full-page advert. You wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't expect it. But it's not unheard of to get emails saying, hey, I'll give you $5 if you, you know, add this to your blog. And you're like, what? But people do that, and you know, unfortunately, some people think they're so honoured to be, you know, contacted by these people that they accept these lowball figures, and then it kind of undermines the rest of the creators. So transparency will really help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you've touched on a major one there, I think, which is self-esteem, and, you know, and valuing ourselves. And I think, again, because this industry, you know, particularly talking about influencers and content creators, is so focused on numbers and, you know, likes and followers and, you know, all these different counts that really by the day are becoming meaningless. We are the people who have to, we have to believe in our value 100%. And I think that, you know, whilst I completely agree about, you know, having some sort of base figure, at least to start off from, at least for where you would say that, you know, you're not accepting anything less than X, and that can look different for multiple people depending on what kind of thing you produce. I know that at least within the union, that's something that I really want to do, is to shape policy and to shape how lawmakers regulate how we work, because so much of that is being done without us in the room. And again, you know, given the stories that we see on influencer pay gap, and given the stories that we, you know, the personal stories that we have around working with brands and working with agencies, there's so much to do in terms of professionalizing the space, in terms of making creators feel like they're being advocated for, and that's a major one for me.
Yeah, no, really interesting there. I think it's important. I think you've summarised it nicely there in terms of professionalising the space, in terms of payments, in terms of mentoring, in terms of just understanding what to expect when you come into this industry, right? Unless, like Tinuke was saying, unless you've got the contacts, you just don't know. So yeah, no, thank you for those points. And I think in an ideal world, of course, it's something that we would want to do straight away, isn't it, in terms of, yeah, this is what we can do straight away, we can go to this person, make it happen. But it's kind of a work in progress in terms of what we need to collectively come together to make change. And I think, Nicole, you were saying earlier in the symposium was kind of about policy. How does policy come into all of this as well, and regulation? Not that we want to rely on the state too much, but so I'd like to go to the audience. We've had a few questions come in. We've got one question from someone who would like to remain anonymous, and one from Jade, and they're quite similar in terms of going into your first junior role. So the types of opportunities would you say that are available for ethnic minorities wanting to go into creative agencies or digital marketing? So would you say there is an ideal first role, or should someone go straight into an intern, or should they look for a paid role, or what type of, should they go freelance or agency? And quite conscious of time as well, so maybe if each of you had maybe a suggestion or two each, what would you advise a university graduate?
One of the things I think we've really tried to sort of, practice our craft over the last 12 years and think about how we can support more young creatives getting into the industry, is we think there's often that real conundrum of you need experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. And so it's quite sometimes difficult for new people breaking into an industry to get the real value of what they can bring to the table. So one of the things that we feel that we can give to that wider community globally is practice. So to actually hone your skills on practicing, responding to briefs, to a deadline, with brand assets, with brand guidelines, with do's and don'ts, and populating a portfolio with work which demonstrates your creative capability. So a lot of creative students might have a portfolio full of beautiful illustrations they've done, but not necessarily to a brief or to something for a brand. And I see brands actually not really as the enemies of creators, as they might have been back in the day, but in many ways, they're almost like the modern day digital Medicis. And brands have got very, very deep pockets, and brands are trying desperately to tick all of those boxes. Sometimes it is just ticking, which is annoying for diversity and inclusion. But if we can get brands to recognise, engage that creator community, behind each creator is that's the potential consumer. It's somebody who can make content. It's somebody you want to target. It's somebody who you want to facilitate and enable in their career. So I think there's an awful lot to enter that entry into the industry, where you can actually get a better job by showing what you can do. So rather than just going completely green, I would also recommend to young people who want to break into the advertising industry or the creative industries, tool yourself up, connect to people on LinkedIn, build out your networks, build out your portfolios. Don't be scared to contact somebody on LinkedIn and ask for help, ask for advice, find mentors, and really sort of make sure that you're arming yourself as much as you can to break into those industries with as much sort of armory around you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are associations. So one thing I would advise is for students to look at any associations, chartered institutes within your sector. And a lot of them actually do offer student discounts. So from now, regardless of what year you're in, start looking at certain associations in advertising, in PR, in the creative space, in design. Start following a lot of those industry and trade publications. Even if you don't sign up for a subscription or anything, I would definitely say obviously start following them and reading them. Look at building your personal brand as well. So as Maya just said, LinkedIn is a really useful platform to engage and network. I think what we sometimes overwhelm ourselves by looking for mentors. You get too many mentors. You can look for a couple of mentors. I mean, a lot of people are going to say that they're busy, and rightly so. But actually, you can be mentored virtually. You don't have to have constant meetings with people. There are people you can start to connect with on LinkedIn from today that could actually change the way your career trajectory ends up going. And also your other social media platforms too. Look at yourself in terms of how you're positioning your creativity online, your visibility online, your personal brand. I know it's going to sound a little bit daunting, but there's a lot of things you can start to do in terms of taking ownership of your career. You can start to do from now, but I definitely recommend networking at some of those associations. I definitely recommend looking at how your personal brand appears on social media, and absolutely networking with individuals online, and eventually when things open up, offline too, networking.
There's a really great resource also available called Social Fixed, which is started by Mercedes Benson, and she has a wide range of incredible roles. I mean, I see things on there being like, oh my gosh, I want to join it, or like, I want to apply for this job. But there's loads. I mean, you know, whether it's entry level or junior entry level, and even all the way up into higher levels of the creative industry. So definitely check that out. It's called Social Fix with a T at the end. So just in case that there's anyone who's looking for something, hopefully that will be helpful.
I would add also, if you could do some sort of freelancing on the side, and even if it's, you know, totally for free, but you have an auntie who needs a website, or you know, or they have a website and they do no actual digital marketing, offer to do it. Have a real portfolio of, you know, actual real work that you've actually done, so that you can go, you know, you can go to that job interview and not go for the very entry level job, because you have experience, you've worked hard, you've got that master's to now pay off as well. So, you know, you don't want to spend a year working for free interning or having a very junior role. If you see something and you can tick off 60% of that job spec, apply for it. Apply for it and have that, you know, have that experience, because you're not going in completely green. You're going, look, I've done these websites, I've actually compiled this marketing plan, it worked. Coming with figures, you know, I managed to get you know, such and such percent of sales or page views or whatever because of these experiences. And also I'd add to what Ronke said about mentors, get a sponsor, because it's different to what your mentor does. Mentors are there for advice. Sponsors will help you get in those rooms that you weren't in before. They will help you, you know, they'll speak on your behalf and sponsor you, so to speak. So sometimes it's having a sponsor who will speak on your behalf and get you into doors that you didn't know. And that sponsor might be someone who had first mentored you and you've shown your worth and you've asked them to sponsor you, but get a sponsor if you can.
Yeah, and you know, I'd also go back to some of the old school bits and pieces which I was raised with. I'm going to be 60 next year, and I've got my son's nearly 30, my daughter's 27, and it's just wonderful watching how the industry's changed. It's terrifying as well, but also really wonderful, because, you know, so much has changed over the past 30 plus years I've been kicking around this industry. But some of those old school values are really important. Manners, you know, shaking somebody's hand, great eye contact, saying please, saying thank you, and just really getting, you know, building, going back to Ronke's point about your personal brand. You want to be that best person in the room. You want to be the person that people want to be around. And I think the great movement towards digital does allow for great opportunity to build your brand. It does allow for you to almost build up your own mini entrepreneurial businesses. You don't have to go back to the old days of having to work 9 to 5 for one employer. And if you start to build up your portfolio of work and your experience, it is possible. It's not always easy, but it is possible to start building your own consultancy or brand or creative agency and collaborating with other creators you want to work with. So I'd also shoot for the stars. Don't lose your ambitions. You know, really think about what you want and what you can bring to the table, and don't really have to be defined by the constraints of conventional work and conventional working hours. If anything, the pandemic shows we don't have to work the way that we used to before, and we need to take some good things out of this mess as well as some terrible things.
Yeah, no, definitely, completely agree. And I think this kind of leads on to the final question, in terms of, and it really kind of a big one and difficult to summarize in 2 minutes, but it's about tokenism within the industry. So thinking about all of your experiences, you would come up with different experiences. So how would you say, if you could summarize in, let's say, 30 seconds each, which is really difficult but important as to why you can continue some of these conversations offline on LinkedIn maybe, but how do you navigate Black tokenism or kind of BAME tokenism, whatever it may be, within the creative industries? So if you, for example, if you want to join an agency or an organisation and you feel like you're being employed because you're Black or an ethnic minority, how do you navigate around that?
Well, first of all, we know we're in capitalism is one hell of a system, right? So first of all, I would say, if you're offered an opportunity of a lifetime, even it, look, I know this could be unpopular, if you know you're a token hire, hate that word, hate it, because you're high, no one's really going to give you a job unless you're qualified for a job, right? So you're already more than qualified. So let's get that right. Let's get that straight. I think that tokenism word is another opportunity, it's yet another tactic used to underestimate and undermine and make Black creatives question themselves, right? Because when you're entering a space, the majority of industries in this world, in the Western world, I should say, in the Western world, are going to be predominantly held by a certain group or type of individuals, right? A certain demographic. And so in this country, majoritively speaking, the creative sector is majority white. So when you get into any organization, it's likely you're going to be a minority in that organization. So if anyone calls you a token, okay, fine, whatever, you're getting your money, get your money, and then do what you feel you can do to dismantle any of those barriers within that organization. Now, that's not to say you'll always be able to, right? There are certain people who enjoy being the only one in the room. Let's be kind of blunt and let's be honest. There's certain individuals who like to be that one person because it makes them feel like they are a gatekeeper, right? So we already have certain gatekeepers, then we have other types of gatekeepers. I'm not going to get into it. But when you get your opportunity in any organization, even if you feel like it's a token hire, you deserve to have an opportunity. You deserve to get paid. When you're in there, though, even though it sounds like a cliche, open the door, put the ladder down, share when there's an opportunity, share within your own network. You know, bring people in when there's an opportunity, a job vacancy, talk about it with your WhatsApp group chat, get into people's DMs, don't isolate yourself. So for me, it's really important. I feel like we need to also be conscious of language because I think tokenism, what does that even, like after a while, what does that mean? Yes, organizations do that and they do that intentionally, but then at the same time, we have to figure out a way of navigating because it starts to make people feel conscious and second guess their skills and their talent. So for me, you've got to figure out a way of navigating safely and being realistic and pragmatic. But once you're in there, if you can, start to chip away. I know it's not always easy, but chip away at that. Don't just shake the table, break the table if you can, basically, if you can.
Yeah, perfect. Were there any other quick thoughts on that?
I would just say, always have courage, have confidence, shine. Be the very best you can be. Don't get pulled down by the people around you. There are so many people and platforms and opportunities to showcase your talent, to showcase what you are and who you are and what your value and what your worth is. So don't be afraid, but just go with a big open heart too. And I know that, Ronke, you're right to be cynical. There is so much shite going out there still in our industry, but let's see if we can break down a few more doors and break a few more tables in the process too. But creativity rocks, and you know, so literally, let's just make this world a better and a more beautiful place to live in.
Absolutely.
No, perfect. I think that summed it up nicely there, Maya. And also, Ronke, thank you for, I think you kind of summarised all of our thoughts there in terms of don't feel shy, don't feel like you don't belong within the industry in that sense. And so thank you, panel. It was great to hear your thoughts. Thank you also to the audience for attending and for the questions. I know we didn't get around to all of the questions, but I hope we addressed them in some capacity or another. Jonathan, did you want to have a closing word?
Just to thank all the marvellous speakers. I mean, the barriers are structural, but they're felt personally. So your generosity in opening up about experience, but sharing your insights and your energy is tremendously wonderful. And it's our duty to build on that commitment, to listen and to put into place the agenda you've set out. I'm really grateful to you all and to everyone who's come to attend this event, and to Nessa for fantastically chairing it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nessa. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, fellow panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you real life. Cheers. Bye. Thank you.